You're listening to Journey for Truth with internationally known medium, Tai Yi practitioner, and radio host Tami Urbanek.
Hello and welcome to Journey for Truth on iHeartRadio and YouTube. I'm Tami Urbanek. Thank you so much for joining me. Journey for Truth Radio is always on demand and with many new episodes. On the JonahLifeInstitute.com website, you will see that there is a free newsletter that you can sign up for. It's always full of information, questions and answers, and very helpful tips and tools for your own personal spiritual healing journey. JonahLifeInstitute.com, that email newsletter only goes out once a month. My guest this week is Casey Keaton and Sarah Romano. They have worked very hard to stop the execution of Rocky Myers. This case is different in multiple ways, and today they're going to talk with us about how it's different. Sarah and Casey, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
First, share with us about what Rocky Myers was charged with.
Rocky Myers was charged here in Alabama for capital murder, which the case actually involved a woman, an elderly woman who was murdered back in 1991. It was a murder robbery. There was a VCR stolen from the woman's home.
And so how is this case different from other murder cases?
It's actually, the sad part is it's probably not that different in terms of what happens with cases, kind of injustices, inequities in the system when you're talking about an African-American male who's living in poverty, dependent upon the system for appointment of a counsel, other things like that. But there are some differences in the state of Alabama that make any case here a little bit different. Mm-hmm. One of those is that we don't have a statewide public defender system. So at his trial, he was appointed contract counsel that, it was a private practitioner who has his own office, not with his own resources. He has to ask the court for any kind of money to hire an investigator or anything like that. Then moving along through his case, Rocky, again, an African-American male, charged with the murder of an elderly white female in Decatur, Alabama, had a jury that consisted of 11 white people and one African-American. Following that, at his trial, he was found guilty through what we now know as a compromise verdict, which means that there were people on the jury who did not believe he was guilty, but because the potential sentence that he was looking at was a death sentence, they agreed to the guilty verdict in exchange for other people coming back with a life without the possibility of parole sentencing recommendation. But in Alabama, the jury only makes that recommendation. Mm-hmm. The judge can override it, even though it is a single elected judge that gets to make that choice. And that's what happened in Rocky's case. The jury came back with a life sentence, and the judge chose to override it.
Well, the other part of this that's very interesting is that, first of all, I read that piece that the judge decided to change it to an execution, but he is mentally incompetent. He's been deemed as mentally incompetent. And that also there was no forensic evidence whatsoever. There was no physical evidence. Is that correct?
Correct. No evidence actually physically tying Mr. Myers to the crime. And he is intellectually disabled. His IQ level is in the low 70s. There are some IQ tests that have come back in the 60s. He reads at approximately a fourth grade level.
So given this information, how can a jury even come to the conclusion that he's guilty when there's no evidence, direct evidence? Was this just simply people who were saying, yes, I saw him, and those people must be believed that they're being honest and accurate?
It's a really messy case. It's one that the people who said that they saw him trading a VCR, mind you, there is nobody that says, I saw him kill this woman.
Or even at her house or any of that.
The people that saw him originally actually indicated that they saw someone else with a VCR, and the police arrested that other person.
Valentine.
Yes. Later, about a month later, some of those people changed their stories, and some of them, by the time trial came back around, actually had changed their story again. So I think it's one of those things where, as a jury is presented with, this is who the police have brought to us, and a whole bunch of people telling different stories, and Rocky not having good representation to challenge that in really clear and effective ways, and also counsel not recognizing that he's intellectually disabled and allowing him to testify in a really jumbled
situation.
An incoherent way.
Yeah.
It didn't even make sense.
So what happened to his legal counsel? Did they just drop the ball? Did they walk away?
During his appeals process, that is exactly what happened. He had an attorney who was filing pleadings, and then just decided that they were no longer going to be involved. And unfortunately, didn't bother to tell Rocky, didn't bother to tell the courts, didn't bother to tell the prosecutor, just walked away.
Wow. When I was watching the video on this and reading the background information, it really made me sad for the individual who's been charged, for Rocky, who's been charged with something that it sounds like he didn't commit. And then a judge decides that the jury's sentencing isn't good enough, and so he's going to determine that Rocky needs to be executed, which I don't agree with executions in general. The soul lives on, the body dies. There are certain things that occur that we don't need to go into detail here. But I've worked with so many people in my own personal work that I know that executing someone does not really solve anything. And plus the fact, it doesn't sound like he even did it. So he has, the two of you is what I'm looking at, or what I'm seeing, the two of you who have come together to care enough to help him move beyond this. So where are you at in this process of helping Rocky? Are you trying to just stop the execution, or are you trying to get his entire trial redone?
Well, we have tried about getting a new trial. Unfortunately, one of the bizarre aspects of capital litigation is that when that attorney walked away from him, because he didn't give anybody notice, that meant that Rocky did not file the next part of his appeal. And when he did not file that next part of his appeal, it procedurally defaulted him from raising any claims after that point. So, unfortunately, we've lost the opportunity to raise a lot of claims, and that are claims of innocence, of intellectual disability, the judicial override issues. We've never been able to argue those in federal court for his appeals. Where we are now is that he is finished with his standard set of appeals, and we are looking at the only option being clemency from the governor here in Alabama.
I also, during the video that I watched, there was one of the jurors on there. I cannot remember her name, but a female juror.
May Puckett.
Yes, who stated that she saw that many of the jurors came in had already deciding that he was guilty, and that she saw that it would be difficult to convince them of otherwise. She did not feel that he was guilty. And so she essentially said the same thing that you stated earlier. At least we'll go for, since everyone is not in agreement of not guilty, we'll go for the life sentence rather than execution to give him some opportunity, I suppose. Did you hear any other stories from other jurors from that initial trial?
Other stories about that same
about how they felt, right? About how they felt, or how
there was another juror that we spoke with who told the same information that May Puckett talked to us about. And so we had spoken with him and gathered that information. Unfortunately, he was at the end stage of his life, and he was in a lot of treatment and unable to participate in the video. But he did give us that information. We also did speak with other jurors on his case that, in just meeting us, like we would go in and tell them we wanted to just talk with them about their experience as a juror and just the things that they remembered about the case. We experienced a lot of resistance as far as like telling us that a few of them would say the correct person was convicted. They called him a thug. They called him the N-word. So they used that in open, free discussion of the case. So it was also clear to us that race had played a big part in their decision-making process and how they approached the information during the trial.
That also saddens me greatly, that part of it, that it was race was involved, which doesn't surprise me at all, but saddens me. And that the other jurors who also did not feel that he was guilty have not come forward. Now, I don't know if it would make a difference or not. I'm not an expert in the legal system by any means, but at least being active in this process instead of passive and saying something, saying, I don't feel that he was guilty.
Yeah, it's, one thing that I from doing capital work for the time that I have now at this point, we've talked to a lot of jurors, not just in Rocky's case, but in so many others. And there's a real sense that the service, the jury service itself, is a real trauma for a lot of these people. And some people can kind of get past it to get to that point where they become a little more active and interested and invested. And then some people can't ever get past that trauma to step out of themselves. So it is definitely sad, and I wish more people were willing to be participatory, like Miss Puckett. Just amazing, because it's very clear in speaking with her, and I think in watching the documentary, just how deeply impacted she was by it. But she was able to kind of take that extra step and get beyond that in order to be involved. And it's a shame that more people can't.
Mm-hmm. Now, is it common practice for evidence to be overlooked for the fact that there was no physical evidence? Is that common, or was that pretty uncommon?
There are a lot of people that are behind bars based solely on kind of this circumstantial, somebody said they saw him there and there's not really any physical evidence. One of the things that really struck me, and it was not brought out in court at trial in a real clear manner, but that Rocky Myers lived across the street from this woman. He had been over to her house. He had mowed her yard. He had borrowed ice. She had, in fact, seen him that day and pointed him, and her cousin who was staying with her that evening had actually pointed him out, and Mrs. Tucker had said, oh, that's my neighbor, he's okay. And yet when she had been stabbed and she called 911, and then later a second time with the EMTs that arrived, gave a physical description of her attacker. That to me is the kind of common sense reason why I believe that Rocky Myers is innocent, is that this woman had the opportunity twice, and instead of saying it was the guy across the street, it was my neighbor,
It was Rocky. She knew his name.
She gave a physical description, a short, stocky black man wearing a white T-shirt. It had blood on it. That's a pretty coherent description of someone, when you didn't have to be that detailed if it was your neighbor.
Right. Now, also, what you were mentioning earlier, that there are many people behind bars, falsely behind bars, due to eyewitnesses or testimony from other individuals. Haven't studies shown that eyewitnesses are not reliable?
Absolutely. A large number of studies, and particularly if it's like cross-race identification. Mm-hmm. So if it is an African American trying to identify a Caucasian person or an Asian person or vice versa amongst mm-hmm. those, the difficulty and the likelihood of mistake actually increases.
So just to, maybe I'm hitting a dead horse here, but so we're taking this Rocky was scheduled to be executed. You were able to get a stay, but he was scheduled to be executed based on testimony that studies have shown, or eyewitness testimony the studies have shown are not reliable, yet no forensic evidence, no physical evidence, and he's still in prison. He's been in prison for 20 years?
Over 20 years now.
And the stay for the case, that he has a stay, is actually not because of what you're just talking about. The stay that he's been granted has to do with litigation that's related to the method, lethal injection. That's what his stay is for, not for any of the other things that we're talking about or that are detailed in that video.
I'm glad you mentioned that. That makes it very clear that there is no regard for his life except for the few people who are trying to get the information out. And that makes me very sad.
And we've been really amazed. I had to say, we started kind of these clemency efforts a little over a year ago, well, longer than that, to do the documentary, but really kind of pushing, talking about it on social media. And we recently had an event here in Montgomery inviting people to watch the documentary. And I've been really amazed at the people that don't have day-to-day interactions with law enforcement. They're not in the legal field at all, but just how willing they are to be involved and to speak out and to talk about it. It's really quite encouraging on a lot of levels.
I'm glad you said that. That is wonderful.
Yeah, it is.
I'm very, very glad to hear that. And so let us move into the documentary. Tell us a little bit about this documentary.
It was an effort that we kind of came up with. In Alabama, clemency is only through the governor. There's not a formal process, and the prior governor, Governor Riley, our current governor is Governor Bentley. Governor Riley used to allow, and other governors before him would allow us to come in and have a clemency hearing where you could put on witnesses, submit evidence. When Governor Bentley came into office, he took that away. So all we can do is kind of just submit something. And we wanted, because we feel like Rocky's case is a unique case in that he kind of has a little bit of everything. There are race issues. We believe he's innocent. There's the judicial override. There's intellectual disability, attorney abandonment, all these kind of things. And we wanted to figure out a unique way to highlight that. And so despite the fact that Sarah and I are both not technologically sophisticated, we said, why don't we do a movie? And we pulled this all together over a period of time, roaming streets. And, one of our interviews is literally sitting out in front of a gas station in Decatur, Alabama, finding people, relocating people, and with some great help from lots of different people, we're able to kind of put this documentary together that I think does a good job of setting out why we think clemency is appropriate. And I think it also gives like a good look at what the justice system looks like in Alabama for people charged with capital crimes.
Right. It sounds like an excellent project. And it's really about being human and being a part of humanity and assisting other people, which is partly what this radio show is about really reaching out to other people and helping each other along our journey, wherever that journey may lead us. Now, the judge who changed the sentencing to execution, he was allowed to because Alabama has that law. So I read that there's been talk about changing that. Is there any progress in that?
No.
Okay.
Not for Alabama is the only state that allows a judge to override a jury. Florida and Delaware also had a similar law until last year. And last year, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down Florida's law that allowed for judicial override and found it unconstitutional under the Sixth Amendment, which guarantees us a right to a jury trial. So Florida's law has been done away with, and Delaware saw that ruling from the Supreme Court and took it upon themselves to change their law. Alabama has refused to do so. But now I will say, fingers crossed and some hopefulness, there is a Democratic representative in the state legislature out of Tuscaloosa, Representative England, who has filed a proposed bill that would do away with judicial override. And a Republican senator, Brubaker, here in the state, has also filed a proposed bill in the Senate, which will be considered this session, again, doing away with judicial override. Now, the question is even if that is successful in the legislature, it leaves 25% or 28% actually, of Alabama's current death row that are there, in spite of a jury giving them a life sentence. And what do you do? What happens to those people?
Right. Where can people find your documentary? Is it available to the public, or is it still only private viewing?
Yes, no, it is available to the public. It's they can find it on YouTube. We have there's a Robin Myers channel on YouTube. We have a website. Well, we have a Facebook page. Clemency for Rocky Myers is on Facebook, and there's links to the video on that through Facebook.
Excellent. And just to be clear, I've been calling him Rocky, which is kind of his nickname. So it's Robin, Rocky Myers. So listeners they're hearing Robin, they're hearing Rocky, and they're not quite sure where to go with that. Okay, so excellent. They can find it on Facebook, YouTube.
And on his webpage, we have uploaded all of the documents. So where we talk about that witnesses changed their statements, changed their testimony, all of that information, all of those documents are on his webpage.
And that's actually a WordPress site. It's Clemency for Rocky Myers, WordPress.
Wonderful. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being a guest on my show, Casey and Sarah.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
And thank you, listeners, for joining me here as well on Journey for Truth on iHeartRadio and YouTube. Until next time, have a fantastic week.